Yatta. My name's Ruben Berg. I'm a proud Goodnage Maori man, and I'm one of the co-chairs of the First People's Assembly of Victoria. And I'm going to run you through a presentation here about what we're hoping to achieve in the first statewide treaty, which is almost here. The work of the First People's Assembly of Victoria, as a democratically elected group of traditional owners, has been intensive across the last couple of years, gathering ideas, thoughts, and consulting with community all across the state. And a consistent theme throughout all those conversations is this simple idea, this simple principle, that decisions about Aboriginal communities should be made by Aboriginal people. And that's what we're trying to implement in this first statewide treaty. This first statewide treaty comes after many, many years and many different steps and stages of the process. We've had the implementation of the treaty negotiation framework. We've had the creation of the Self-Determination Fund, which is a powerful pool of resources to support traditional owners on their journey to treaty. We've had the establishment of the Treaty Authority, the independent facilitator to oversee negotiations, and we also advocated for the establishment of the Yurok Truth and Justice process, which we've seen just wrap up recently. So there's been lots of hard work across many, many years now to get us to this point where we are now. And importantly, through that treaty negotiation framework, it's been agreed that there'll be two types of treaty here in Victoria. Treaties at a local level, led by traditional owner groups, and it's been powerful to see Jara put themselves on the negotiation register to express their interest in this process. But at the statewide level, the First People's Assembly of Victoria is negotiating the statewide treaty. And at the end of the last term of the Assembly members put out a statement of intention about what they plan to do in this current term of the Assembly. And one of the key aspects of that statement of intention was about the establishment of a First Peoples representative decision-making body with law-making and decision-making powers. And so that's been our focus across the last couple of years now as we progress towards this first statewide treaty. And I'm pleased to say we're hoping to deliver on our commitments we've made here. A little while back, the Assembly released its intention around what it planned to negotiate through this first statewide treaty. And we've had many, many different conversations with community about those aspirations and about what we're hoping to deliver. And today, I plan to give you a bit more detail about what that is we plan to deliver in this first statewide treaty. We've also had a series of joint statements that have been released from the state via the Premier and the Minister and the First People's Assembly of Victoria. So really encourage people, if you want to follow along and see what's been happening, follow along those joint statements, follow along our social media, follow along on our emails, and you'll get the full details about what we're trying to progress. And as I said, I'll give you some more of those details in this presentation. This is where the Assembly currently sits in terms of its roles and functions. So its role is to represent its community in various different aspects, as we've been chosen by our communities. It's also our role to make representations to government, to negotiate statewide treaty, and to work together with traditional owners, ACOs, and the community more broadly. We also have a role in overseeing the Self-Determination Fund. So that's where we currently stand. And through this first statewide treaty, we're hoping to expand on that. We're really hoping to see a transformation under treaty, where we go from a First People's Assembly that's primarily about negotiating statewide treaty to actually living that statewide treaty, to facilitating self-government and nation building. So here's what we're pushing for, and it's important I'm very clear here that what I'm showing here is the Assembly's view, the Assembly's aspirations as we head into the finalisation of negotiations of the first statewide treaty. So these are the various powers and functions that we want to see under this new First People's Assembly of Victoria, an enhanced First People's Assembly of Victoria. And through the coming slides, I'll talk through each of these different functions that we hope to see added as part of this first statewide treaty. Alongside the broader reforms we want to see to the Assembly, there are some other aspirations that we have, what we term our path towards the treaty for generations. And so some of the key things we're also wanting to bring to the table for this first statewide treaty are making sure that truth and treaty is actually taught in our schools, that the curriculum recognises the importance of responding to truth and of sharing the stories about treaty making and the changed relationship that we're looking to achieve through treaty between First Peoples and the state. And we hope that all peoples in the state can understand the true history of First Peoples from a First Peoples perspective. And having Yurok's recommendations and Yurok's official public record will be really powerful to leverage off that. We're hoping to be able to put in place rules to enable the sharing of cultural water flows. So there's no specifics about actual cultural water flows within this treaty, but if there does come a time where groups are able to achieve cultural water flows in a more fulsome way, we want to make sure that there's capacity for traditional owner groups to share that water, recognising the existing systems that are in place, but enabling traditional owners to find their own ways that they might want to share, rather than just on financial terms, but on cultural terms, they might want to share and trade water. We also want to see the creation of a First Peoples Institute, a way of making sure we can build up the knowledge and skills and capability of First Peoples to fill the exciting new roles we know that are coming within the treaty era. We also want to make sure that First Peoples have a greater say in the processes related to the confirmation of Aboriginality. This is not to change the three-part test that already exists, but just to make sure that when people are seeking that confirmation from their community, that they're accepted by their community as an Aboriginal or Torres Strait Islander person, that those processes are designed and led by First Peoples. We're also looking to make sure that there's a greater role for First Peoples and traditional owners in the naming of places and the naming of monuments. We want to make sure that when there's funds being spent directly on First Peoples to assist in infrastructure and the like, that funding is being led by First Peoples. We want to make sure that the Rook recommendations are actually being delivered and monitored to make sure government is fulfilling its commitments in that space. And we also want to make sure that the public sector, public servants, that their roles and responsibilities are adjusted to be mindful of this new treaty landscape. So those are some of the things more broadly that we hope to achieve through this first statewide treaty. And it's not just the things that are specifically written in this first statewide treaty we're hoping to achieve. This is a longer term aspiration as well. So there will be some things specifically delivered through the first statewide treaty. There'll be some things that will be enabled through the first statewide treaty. We're also hoping to get commitments through this first statewide treaty of what subject matters we'll be able to discuss in future statewide treaties. And there'll also be a raft of outcomes that are delivered through traditional owner treaties. Alongside ensuring that there's greater roles and functions for the Assembly, we recognise that also comes with greater responsibilities. And so we're making sure that we put in place greater measures of answerability to the community around the work of the future Assembly. A few of the ways we plan to do that is through ensuring we continue to have elections to make sure that community, the First Peoples community of Victoria, can choose their representatives on the Assembly. We'll put in place participatory governance models to make sure that there are systems designed by the community about how the Assembly makes its decisions and that they're part of that decision-making process. We want to continue to strengthen the role of the Elders' voice to make sure we're getting appropriate oversight from a cultural perspective for the work of the Assembly. There'll be really strong complaints mechanisms to make sure that if there are concerns around that future Assembly, there's ways of raising those concerns and addressing those concerns. There'll be greater transparency of this future Assembly with public reporting requirements, which is really important to make sure there is that trust and confidence in the work of the Assembly. And the future Assembly will also be subject to external oversight from the Treaty Authority, from IBAC, from the Ombudsman. And so it's really important that we're making sure that as we do have these expanded roles, there is that expanded accountability and oversight. So when we think about this future Assembly, it's not just the Assembly itself. There are some additional components to this Assembly that will sit within the treaty landscape we hope to be achieving through this first statewide treaty. We want to see the continuation of the Self-Determination Fund as a separate component of the Assembly. We want to see the creation of an independent accountability arm to hold government accountable for the delivering on their outcomes, delivering on their commitments, delivering on their obligations. We want to see the creation of an independent truth-telling and healing arm. Whilst Yuruk is wrapping up as a Royal Commission, we know there's still important work to be done in the truth-telling space. And so we want to make sure there's an independent truth-telling arm. And as mentioned before, we want to make sure that there's this First Peoples Institute, an independent limb of the Assembly that's ensuring we build up the skills and capability of First Peoples across this state. So those are the aspirations in terms of the functions and the format of this future Assembly. Again, to stress, these are just the Assembly's aspirations, and as we continue on get closer and closer to treaty outcomes, we'll be able to confirm exactly where we've landed on these things. So in terms of the actual functions and roles of the future Assembly itself, I'm going to talk now through each of these specific points to get a better understanding of what we're hoping to achieve through this first statewide treaty. In terms of the law-making powers, we want to see this future Assembly recognised by the state as a body that is capable of making laws and rules about things that directly affect First Peoples. Alongside the capability to do such a thing, we want to see the transfer of a few distinct roles and responsibilities for this future Assembly in terms of rulemaking. One of those, as mentioned before, is around the confirmation of Aboriginality for the Assembly to work with community and design processes to enable and ensure that when First Peoples are going through the process of getting that confirmation, that they're getting the right details and the right requirements, the right process are being followed as they go about seeking that confirmation. In addition, the rules and around how traditional owner groups may want to share cultural flows is another component of that, as well as rules to enable the future Assembly to determine standards for cultural competence, so that when organisations are out there trying to assess whether or not they are culturally competent, there's a formally recognised standard that they can use to actually demonstrate that they are culturally competent. Appointment powers is another really critical area of responsibility we want to see handed over to this future Assembly, specifically as it relates to appointments of First Peoples to key boards and roles across government. This is not talking about public servants' roles. This is talking about roles, governance roles that sit within external limbs of government. An example of that is the members of the Aboriginal Heritage Council. And whilst the Aboriginal Heritage Council at the moment does run through their own processes to determine who they wish to have join that council, it's ultimately the Minister for First Peoples who provides that final tick of approval. We want to see that final tick of approval handed over to the First Peoples Assembly of Victoria. And there are similar roles that we're looking at seeing transferred as the decision-making body being the Assembly for those appointments. We want to make sure that this future body can actually talk directly to government, that there's requirements about how the government must engage with this First Peoples Assembly and its responsibilities to be able to have those conversations. So our aspiration is that the future Assembly will be able to talk directly to Parliament once a year, we'll be able to meet with all members of the Cabinet twice a year, and that there's guidelines in place about how the future body interacts with ministers and with heads of departments. We also want to make sure that where government is still responsible for making various decisions around First Peoples, that there's a duty to consult. That when the government is making new laws or policies or making decisions about First Peoples, there's a duty for them to consult with the First Peoples Assembly prior to making those decisions. And so that will ensure that First Peoples' voices are heard on those important matters. We want to ensure also that in the future treaty era, that the role of the First Peoples Assembly, the role of First Peoples, is embedded within the ceremony of the state. So that when there are key functions, key moments within the state, that there's the role there for First Peoples clearly defined, so we can participate alongside all other Victorians in those sorts of ceremonies and events. And we also want to make sure that we can celebrate and share the powerful achievements we've done through treaty making here in Victoria. We also want to see the future body capable of actually continuing the process of negotiating treaties. As we've said many times, this is just from our intention the first statewide treaty. We hope there to be more statewide treaties, and so it would be the role of this future body to negotiate those future statewide treaties. We want to see the skills and knowledge of our First Peoples community enhanced, particularly as we see new roles within the treaty era. And so that'll be a key function of that Knowledge and Skills Institute that we've mentioned. And it's really, there'll be far-reaching benefits, not just for the Assembly, but for Aboriginal community-controlled organisations, for traditional owner organisations, and other organisations to have highly skilled First Peoples being able to step into key roles. We want to see the expansion of the Self-Determination Fund, so it can not only just deliver on the first purpose, which is about supporting traditional owners on their journey towards treaty making, but be able to focus on the second purpose, which is about building wealth and prosperity for First Peoples, to have an economic resource that we can leverage to achieve the sorts of outcomes that we want to see achieved without being contingent on direct support from government. We want to see the creation of this independent accountability mechanism, and this is something that draws from recommendations that have been coming from many, many years now, particularly around the Closing the Gap work, and the Productivity Commission have spoken about the importance of an independent, First Peoples-led accountability mechanism. And that's what we'll be looking to create, so that they can access the data to see how government is tracking, to see how they're performing, provide recommendations about what can be done to improve, so we can get better outcomes for First Peoples, particularly in the Closing the Gap space. And the last component is around that ongoing truth-telling. We want to see a First Peoples-led repository for all the truths that have been captured through the wonderful work of Yuruk, but also to be able to ensure that First Peoples can continue to come forward and share their stories, and then also enable more place-based conversations to happen around truth-telling so that all Victorians can better understand the impact of colonisation on First Peoples. So those are our aspirations for what we want to achieve through this first statewide treaty. As always, we encourage everyone to follow along. If you are a member of the First Peoples community, we encourage you to enrol and vote. If you're an ally, we encourage you to sign up to our newsletters and come and support the work that we're doing. Hopefully that was useful, and never hesitate to reach out if you want more information. Thank you. We'll look.